Oh boy, just another day. I mean, I guess we could have just replayed the show from yesterday, because you get this situation with Greg Sankey now, apparently, and I see a lot of Big 12 fans talking about how somehow, some way, Brett Yormark is parroting what Greg Sankey has said. We want a 5'11". We want, opportunity. And there's a lot of people who feel like Brett Yormark bent the knee under the pressure of the Red Wedding, otherwise known as Greg Sankey. That was a Game of Thrones ref. Nothing?
Right, yeah.
Do you believe that Brett Yormark and the Big 12 caved under pressure from the SEC?
No, I mean, I think what the Big 12 did is they were put in a position where they had to choose the lesser of two evils, in my opinion. Meaning, the 5-11 format, doesn't really guarantee them anything outside of their conference champion being in. So it could be one team in and that's it. But they get more access in a 16-team CFP model, or you go with the other model that's being proposed, which is 4 for the Big 10, 4 for the SEC, 2 for the Big 12, 2 for the ACC, and so on and so forth. And you most certainly have the optics of bending the knee, because you're saying that you're half as worthy as the SEC at that point, that your conference is not the quality of the SEC, and that your conference can't compete on that level, so you deserve half of what the SEC and the Big are getting.
Is that true? Is that perception a reality? Because inevitably, I think we're in this universe now where you either have to ride the coattails. If you're the Big 12, and noticeably absent in all of these conversations is the ACC, I would remind you. But if you are the Big 12, I think you have to do what you have to do to survive. And I think one of the things that I will continue to talk about, one of the things that I will say in perpetuity, Greg Sankey is not looking to shrink the game of football. He is not looking to eliminate the Big 12 and the ACC. Hell, he's not looking to eliminate the G5, which I think he probably should do. But I think one of the things that's very clear is Brett Yormark is an operator. Brett Yormark understands where college football is going, and Brett Yormark understands how to make deals. And while some will tell you that the Big 12, collapsed under the weight of the SEC or bent the knee, as I saw on the old X machine today, I'm here to tell you this is what's good for business. I go back to Kirk Schultz and the Pac-12 standing in the way of the college football playoff and $600 billion trillion. And that was never going to happen because Kirk Schultz needed to breathe. And when we're talking about the air that is critical to survive in college football, it's the SEC and it's Greg Sankey. And I think Brett Yormark did the right thing.
Well, first and foremost, I like 16. More access is better for the Big 12 for sure. But I'm also about fairness. And there's been a lot of conversations out there about AQs. And, from where I sit, and I know I speak on behalf of our coaches and our ADs, we want to earn it on the field. And I'm adamant about that. And I think a 5+11 format does that. It's fair. It's what our fans want. And they don't want an invitational. They want a true playoff system. And we have that right now. I thought last year going to a 12-team format was fantastic. It played out exactly how people had hoped. It was very dramatic. It created a lot of interest. Going to 16, I think, does more of that. But I think we need to put these multiple AQs, take it out of the conversation and focus on what's right for college football. And I think 5+11 does that, and that's our preference.
I don't know how much more you can pair it with Greg Sankey has said, because remember what the 5+11 is, right? That is the 5 highest ranked conference champions. So you would assume the entirety of the P4 and then the highest ranked G5 champion gets in, and then 11 at-large bids. And how those 11 at-large are determined and what that looks like, I think that part is still to be determined. Because as we've talked about on this show, I think you guys are well aware by now, I'm a big believer that strength of schedule has to be one of the most important components. I think it is not it is not only fair, it is critical. And you look at the document that the SEC shared with its constituents today, and you look at this right here. This is the average Massey rating, and the fact that the SEC only has 2 teams outside the top 50 in the Massey in the last 10 years. 2 teams outside in the last, I said 10 years. And if that wasn't enough, now you start looking at strength of record over the last 10 years, and they've only got 2 teams outside the top 50 in the last 10 years on strength of record, which is remarkable. Remarkable. I cannot describe to you how different that is and how incredible it is that when you start listening to guys like Mark Harlan, the athletic director at Utah that we talked about last night when the show was ending, this news was breaking, that, he is strongly behind Mark Harlan at Utah 5-11. I think the public and we agree that you have to win this thing on the field. And listen, I know all these people watch the Monty program.
Clearly.
But how long have we been saying that you have to find a way to get along here? You have to find a way to be on a similar trajectory, because this is a little bit longer of a bite from Greg Sankey. But listen to what the messaging here. Put yourself in Brett Yormark's shoes. Put yourself in Jim Phillips's shoes at the ACC, Tony Petitti at the Big Ten, all of the presidents in the country, all of the athletic directors in the country. And you have the czar of college football telling you that he's not open to compromise.
Consensus building is one thing. Continual compromise that diminishes is another. And we were in a CFP meeting 6 weeks ago with the full group, and one of my colleagues in a different conference said, well, what we need is to compromise. And I said, look, to achieve this point, I'll make the list of compromises. I don't think you want me to share it again. A couple of those are these allocations for other conferences. And when we did that, we were introducing a political solution because we needed unanimity. So the 5 conference champions having access to a playoff. I always said, let's go 1 through 8, 1 through 12. I've said in the current contest, let's go 1 through 16, but we have this political compromise around 5 conference champions. I don't need that compromise. The SEC doesn't need that compromise. We've earned everything that we've obtained in the college football playoff through the agreed upon process. Others have displaced. It is harder for me to explain in my room in this era, after all of the movement of teams, why those types of allocations exist. That generates conversation. Well, if one point of allocation is healthy for someone else, and when you look at the metrics, our conference is unique competitively. Whether it's the Massey ratings compilation over the last 4 or 10 years, SP Plus, which I'm still not sure what that is. You just pick strength of record. We don't have many teams outside the top 50 frequently. Everybody else has a much different spread. That's different, and that has to be understood. And so when you bring that into allocations for others, it properly, I think, raises a question. Why don't you go get more for us? And again, I'll go back to my philosophy, which I think is a responsibility for the game. I didn't want allocations. What I thought was appropriate was, hey, let's have criteria. Let's pick 1 through 12. You aren't going to change anything. And we ultimately compromised on 4. Now, how many more compromises are there to make this work? And maybe those compromises need to come from some other corner rather than the Southeastern Conference.
Bro.
I don't know what else he can say. And again, I understand that we're probably worn out on this topic, but every day you see more and more people coming to Sankey's side of the line. And what I think is so funny is you hear all the non-SEC supporters losing their shit over the fact that, well, everything's handed to them and they want to slam the system? Has everything been handed to the SEC? And if your answer is yes, tell me how it's been handed to them. Because I don't view it that way. The dynasties in the modern era of college football have largely landed in the SEC. That means they've had teams, Alabama, Georgia, that have won consistently year after year after year. All they do is win games, right? And then Alabama has Nick Saban retire. They don't go to the college football playoff, and the college football world rejoices that they're held out. And now you have a system where Greg Sankey is suggesting, let's get rid of the AQs, earn it on the field. Oh, that's terrible. The SEC is going to steal it. Okay, well, let's have a 5+11 where the 5 highest ranked conference champions get in, and then there's 11 more. Oh, the SEC is going to steal it. What would you have him do? Because nothing Greg Sankey says and nothing Greg Sankey does is ever going to be good enough for all of the people in college football who just don't win enough games on the field.
Can't say it better myself.
That's what this comes down to.
It's a classic schoolyard playground conversation. You're not doing enough to be included in the group in terms of decision making, and you know, when that gets brought up, and when the SEC is out here making PowerPoints and printing them out and handing them to you, showing you that they don't frequently have multiple teams outside of the top 50, and you quite frequently do, and you're not happy about that, yeah, I would probably be going towards the 5-11 model as well.
And this comes down to all the folks who say, oh, the Big Ten's better than the SEC. Well, show me where that bears out in data. Show me where that bears out in statistics, because it simply does not. It simply does not. If you look at the numbers and you understand what the numbers tell you, at best they're close, and usually they're better. And you look at last year, who really got screwed last year? The SEC did. And then you start looking at it in a 10-year window. And this isn't parity. This is domination. This graphic you're looking at is domination. It's not parity. This right here, strength of record, is not parity. And we've talked about this for days and days on the show. And Big Ten fan, oh, we've won 2 national champions. No, you haven't. Michigan's a bunch of scumbag cheating losers who stole a national championship. So that you're not getting credit for that. And Ohio State, I think, largely got screwed by those cheating scumbag losers in Ann Arbor. And you tried to hand them an impossible road to navigate. And they not only navigated it, they dominated it.
Agreed.
And won what is, I think, inarguably, but some would argue, but I think inarguably the most dominant national championship ever.
Yeah, most difficult road, most dominant performances. Yeah, I mean, you can't have it both ways. And I think that I don't know. I think something you just said 2 minutes ago about, you know, if people are tired of talking about this, I'm not quite sure how you as a college football fan can get tired of talking about this. This is the off the football field fight of your life if you're not the SEC and the Big Ten. And you've got Brett Yormark having to do what commissioners have to do, which is go on ESPN and say what you're in favor of and let the world know. And behind the scenes, you're having to most likely, I would guess in the Big 12, first of all, explain the differences between these two models and how it affects your members, one. Two, once everybody's on the same page about what the two models are, then from there, you're going to have to explain why the 5-11 is better for you, even though it has less guarantees. Good luck with that. Good luck with that. That's a very difficult position to be in.
I agree.
And I do agree. And you said this before the show, and now I'm starting to see it on X here, starting to come out with all the writers and everyone talking about it, that Greg Sankey wants to push this conversation towards eliminating the committee.
That's exactly right.
And you know, getting this conversation towards, because again, the Brett Yormark bite, I think is very much, hey, we're working with Greg. this is the Big 12's best path forward. We may not like it, but it is in fact our best path forward, which is, hey, we still have our conference champion getting in, but now as a conference, we gotta move forward. We gotta start winning football games on the field in order to keep, our chances up. And some years that means we're only going to get one team in. In other years, maybe we get 3 teams in. But that's where it's going.
And you can't have jackwagon loser from Michigan putting all of his friends in and trying to damage Ohio State. Like that's not going to work, right? And I think when you listen to Greg Sankey talk about just how bad the selection process was last year, I think it lacked integrity, it lacked ethics, it lacked clarity or understanding for what went into it. Oh, I know why. Because the scumbag losers in Ann Arbor don't have any kind of a plan. They're not intelligent people. They're terrible administrators. Like we're watching that play out. Well, guess what? The scumbag losers in Michigan probably helped the SEC and everybody else in college football understand how bad it is, to allow idiots like Ward Manuel to be anywhere around anything that's important and damages young people's lives, because that's all Ward Manuel at Michigan has done, in my opinion, is damage young people's lives. It's like that's his contract, is to how can we single-handedly ruin as many young people in this country as possible? Well, we can put Ward Manuel in charge of anything and he'll do that. Well, guess what? Now you're seeing the consequences of that. Now you're seeing a 5-11 model where I think human beings are largely going to be rendered useless in the selection process, as it should be. Absolutely as it should be. And what's going to matter is who won on the field and who lost on the field. And if you don't win games, you're not getting into the college football playoff. No more free rides from jerk off in Ann Arbor. No more easy schedule for Penn State and cock on thigh. No, those days are over.
No more free passes for Indiana.
Those days are over. It is, I think it should be 1 through 16, period. Done. So I don't think the conference championship should matter.
Then the question, obviously, that we have to ask is, okay, let's say that we did get to a place where it was just 1 through 16. What is the binding metric to rank these teams? Because if that's where it goes, there has to be a universally agreed upon metric that is level across the board, right? There has to be a way for the Big 12 and the SEC on a piece of paper to say, yep, we did the same thing, and the only difference was we won more games, or we, like whatever it might be. And I think this is where the uncomfortable conversation around the Super League has to come in, because it's cool to talk about 1 through 16 and, hey, well, why don't we just go top to bottom, no AQs? Well, because the reality is we don't have a way for all these teams in college football to play by the same standard.
Correct.
Which is why AQs got brought up in the first part.
And I go back to the college football power index at ESPN last year, which is what this graphic is. And you look at strength of schedule and you start to understand why it can't just be strength of schedule 1 through 16. Michigan was terrible last year.
Yeah.
Right? You can't have Michigan getting into the college football playoffs, an embarrassment.
Well, and the proper way to vocalize that is this strength of schedule metric right here is not a proper representation of the best teams in college football.
Correct.
That's what that
is.
But
what it is a proper representation of the teams on this list who won a lot of games and should be rewarded because they're, one of the top 11 to 16 teams in the country. And look at that. Georgia has the number 1 strength of schedule, in Ohio State, who again got absolutely screwed by that scumbag loser in Ann Arbor, had the number 2 strength of schedule last year. But just because Mississippi State had the number 3 strength of schedule, well, you got to win games on the field.
So I do think there's a world where you could say, okay, and this is, I think, what we've talked about so much on the show is like, hey, okay, well, let's look at strength of schedule, just at face value, right? Who played the most difficult strength of schedule? Who had the hardest schedules? That's our first sort of, line item, right? That we're going to rank these teams by. Then we're going to look at overall record. right? Because you got to look at overall record.
Mhm.
Okay, well, there's got to be some, there's got to be some sort of benchmark, whether that's, hey, to get into the CFP, you have to be a 10-win team, or like there's got to be some type of benchmark there. You got to have one of the best strength of schedules. You got to be a 10-win team.
See, and I think I would do it based on strength of schedule, strength of record. Third, I would probably have it strength of schedule, record against power fours, strength of record, and then I think if you're still, because you're never probably getting past the second tiebreaker, but you can use any metric you want after that. My opinion is you have to have the ability to look at those top 16 teams and say, how important were those wins really? Notre Dame didn't belong in the national championship last year, not on the schedule they played, right? But if you look at their strength of schedule, well, they supposedly had the fourth strength of schedule, the third strength of record, right? Like I understand it. I get it. But I think you have to reward, and this is what my point is, you have to reward the SEC because it is by far the best football conference, and it's not close.
Yeah, and I think to that point, that's what I'm saying. Like people who are lighting up Brett Yormark for bending the knee, as they say, or taking concessions to make Greg Sankey happy, you're not looking at this the right way, in my opinion, because the Big 12, like Brett Yormark's task here as the commissioner of the conference is to put the conference in the best position possible moving forward. Not only from a monetary perspective, from a competitiveness perspective, certainly from an academics perspective, like that's his job. And so the best way to do that is not by, taking half as much as the SEC, but by saying, hey, we're going to take some risk on the front end that, hey, we don't have as many guaranteed spots, but damn, dude, can we get it going in Lubbock? Can we start winning some games in Salt Lake? Like, can we? Because again, with all due respect, and we talk about Utah on this show a lot. From a Big 12 perspective, Utah hasn't been anything so far. Now, I think they will be, but that's a different conversation. So if you're Brett Yormark, you're sitting here saying to your conference, and you're in your room, as these guys like to say, you're sitting here saying to these people, bro, we have to start winning on the field, which is why I think last night you had Mark Harlan saying we need to win on the field, right? You had Brett Yormark saying we need to win on the field. My question is, for the Big 12 specifically, where are the ADs from the middle of the country in this conference? Wait.
Where are the ADs from the Big 10? Where are the presidents from the Big 10? Where's Tony Petitti? Where is anybody in the ACC? You know where they are? They're hiding from the SEC. Why aren't they doing media? Oh, because we're all talking about the SEC. Because that's what people care about. Do you really think, and I know this will probably piss people off, but do you really think if the Virginia athletic director was out talking about Virginia football, he would even be a blip on the radar with SEC media days coming to an end here, the spring meetings? Nobody would care. Nobody would care. I think it goes to tell you the power of Brett Yormark's brand, that the Big 12 meetings overlap with the end of the SEC meetings, and we're all talking about Brett Yormark and Greg Sankey. And the real issue is, and what a lot of people don't want to talk about is, what's the dominant brand in college athletics? What's the dominant brand in college football? The SEC. Who's the dominant personality in college athletics right now? Come on. It's not close. It's Greg Sankey.
Yeah.
And when you look at the fact that they do media every day, the Big Ten met last week and didn't do, I don't believe they had a media session. The SEC did media every day and has throngs of media members there. Every major media member is at SEC Media Day.
Mm-hmm.
Every major one, or at spring meetings, excuse me. I think we are headed in the right direction, and I think my only complaint here is that the G5 continues to get a free pass into the college football playoff.
Mm-hmm. And I'm assuming that will get addressed. But that's certainly, that's going to be, in terms of importance, that's going to be behind figuring out what the Power Four are doing. And I agree. There's
I
no
would agree.
way. There's no way that the Boise State situation can happen again. That's just not, like, you don't want to have G5 on that document we just showed you from the SEC.
Well, and I think that the scumbag losers in Ann Arbor can never have a hand in how the college football playoff is decided.
Well, and again, I think that's the other important piece here. Like, not having a committee takes all the corruption out of it, right?
Yes.
Like, whether we're talking about Ward Manuel or Bubba Cunningham, you can't have a committee. And I think that everyone wants to say, oh, well, this should be decided on the field. Okay, well, then decide it on the field. Like, put your neck out there, Big 12, and say, yep, we're agreeing to a 5-11 model, and it's going to be decided on the field.
And I think the hardest part for the Big 12 is, again, not to beat this dead horse, but Utah, Oak State, Texas Tech, Kansas,
multiple
K-State.
Key brands.
Like, the list of disappointments in this league last year were massive. That can't happen again. Can't happen again. Because the idea, because all the Big 12 fans want to say, well, we beat up on each other. Yeah, but that's what everybody's doing in November.
Isn't that every conference?
That's every single conference late in the season.
And I think, too, for the Big 12, like, you look at how the conference is made up, and nobody's saying that every team in the conference has to just be incredible. But what you do have to have is, in my opinion, for the Big 12, you got to have 5-6 teams vying for the championship of the conference in October. Like, you got to have 5-6 legitimate contenders who are in the conversation and in the rankings every week.
I agree.
Because and we've seen this play out, right? And this is kind of Greg Sankey's point. Hey, if we've got, 7 teams that are vying in the old model for two spots, like, you're getting that in. You're gonna fill up half the college football playoff. So I just think that I want the Big 12 to. I guess what I would say is, I hope that coming off of these meetings and coming off of, like, the Brett Yormark comments and what Greg Sankey is saying, I hope that administrators in the Big 12 don't take it personally, but more say, okay, this is our opportunity to get back into the conversation. If we double down, right, and we invest in our programs, and we take NIL seriously, and take the portal seriously, and take, hiring good coaches on our staffs for football seriously, we can get back into the conversation. Because, again, I'm just going to tell you, you're never going to be the SEC, but you can certainly beat the hell out of the ACC.
And I agree with you. Amongst these changes, we have to get the corruption out of the process.
Yeah.
We have to get people like Ward Manuel to never be allowed to play a role in
How's
the
a Michigan
process
man making
again.
a decision on Ohio State in the college football playoff?
And screwing them.
Clearly.
Like, it's amazing to me that that goes on. With the absolute lawlessness with which Michigan runs its athletic department, the humiliation that is Michigan basketball, the humiliation that is having the FBI on your campus, like, to put that piece of shit in charge of the selection committee was, he is. Do you guys understand what a loser Ward Manuel is? Do you guys understand the scandals and the awfulness that he oversaw? You can never allow an absolute loser like Ward Manuel to be the chair of that committee. It can never happen again.
It's insane.
I think it was so bad, and it worked out great. It brings me great pleasure seeing, Jim Harbaugh absolutely smack Michigan in the face, Santaono smacking Michigan in the face by taking a job of lesser stature at Florida. You just look at the way the FBI dominated Matt Weiss. It brings me great pleasure that Ohio State was able to put its foot on the throat of Michigan. Because if there was anybody who screwed college football last year, it was Michigan.